welcome everyone. It's a little bit after 2, so I want to get started, even though I know this is a large class and we'll probably have some other folks joining us as we go along. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Deb Livingston, and I will be your Get Set Up guide for this class on soups from scratch. And I am going to just give you a little bit about housekeeping issues. For those of you who've been here many times before, you've heard this a lot. For those of you who've only been here a few times, or for whom this might be their first, I just want to say that we are a training organization for seniors by seniors. And we really have enjoyed our time since getting started back in the beginning of this pandemic. We've really seen this platform take off, and so many relationships develop and so much learning happen. And I am so excited when I hear people say, oh, I recognize and I see faces that I knew from class yesterday. And I certainly see several of you who've been in my classes, but who are also brand new to my classes, and that's a lot of fun. So welcome back to everyone. We are not a sales organization, so I just want to give you that disclaimer. Won't be selling anything to you, although we do show products and services, and sometimes I share some websites with you. So that's what that's all about, but we're not selling anything. And I am recording this session, so you are welcome to request a copy of the recording if you like, or you can just come back to the session. If you do want to request a recording, I did put the email address in the chat box. It's help@getsetup.io. The recording's usually available a few hours after the class is over, and you can request from there. You would also want to use that email address if you are having trouble in any way technologically getting connected with us or having any problems with a class. At the end of this session, I'm going to send you an email that will just give you some summary of the class brief, but mostly what's on that email will be attachments that will give you the recipes that I share with you today. So that's the most important part, and they should be PDF documents. So I'd like you to make sure that you get that email and then contact help@getsetup.io if you have any problems with that, because I really want you to have those recipes. In that email, there's also a link for feedback. So we sure would appreciate if you could give us a few pointers on what we did well, what we could improve. That would be great. And I think that might be all that I need to share from a housekeeping standpoint. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and make sure that's the case. I think I have a little slide here. Can everyone see my screen right now that says soups from scratch? Can you
that's good.
Can you see the Does that soup look good? Yeah, okay, awesome. All right, so I think I have talked with you about most of these things. The only thing I would add is that I encourage you to chat during these classes. Of course, as we go along, if you want to unmute yourself and say something or ask a question, that's great. We have, let's see how many participants we have in the class right now. We have 35 participants, so that gets to be a little bit large. So that's when the chat comes in really handy, and you can go in there and type your questions, also your ideas and your suggestions, because I find that we all learn a lot from each other as we're going through these sessions. I certainly only bring a piece of the puzzle to these classes, and you can help me complete that puzzle with some of your knowledge and wisdom about the subject at hand. So I'd like to get that started right now by asking you what brought you today. And why don't you put a few words in the chat about that, and I'll take a look at that as we go so that I make sure I'm addressing what's of interest to you today. I love homemade soups, Chris. Me too. I just went to the grocery store and bought a whole lot of ingredients to test a whole lot more recipes. So you need some new inspiration. Yeah. Okay, Rita, I got it. Low salt homemade soups. I think we're going to be touching that today. 6 inches of snow. Where are you, Linda? Oh, liquid diet from radiation. So looking for new ideas for soups and smoothies. Okay, Gail.
This is Linda. I'm in Wisconsin, up north.
6 inches of snow, yeah. Our snow in Pennsylvania has finally melted. Okay, so it looks like we've got lots of different options here, lots of desire for really doing something homemade and making soups that are healthy and just having great ideas for some warming meals during this winter time. So that's what I'll aim to do today. I have to tell you that I did this class for the first time last week, and I'm always so ambitious about how much content I have, so that I found out I had way more to talk about than time for it. So I want to let you know that what we're going to do today is get started with the basics. So we're going to talk about, just very briefly, the many benefits of soup. I probably don't have to tell you a lot of these, but there may be some you don't know. And then we'll go over some basic soup terms, not all of them, just the ones we're going to be referring to in the next session or so. And then we're going to focus a big part of our session today on making homemade stock and broth, because that's really where a healthy and a delicious soup starts. And I know that there are a lot of us that like to go out to the grocery store and get those boxed broths because they're just really easy. But the bottom line is they're not as flavorful and they're often not as healthy. So I want to get you started on the right foot, and we're going to talk about that and talk about forming a base for some broth soups and share just a couple recipes today. But I want to tell you that what this inspired me to do was turn around and create some additional sessions that I'm working on right now for more soup recipes, types of recipes, bean soups and chowders and cream soups and chilled soups. So look for that, because I expect that I'll be sharing more recipes in the weeks and months to come for soups, and I hope you come back for those. So let's go ahead and get started. Let me just check the chat one more time here to see if I've missed anything that anyone said. Very easy dump and go recipe that require little or no chopping and prep time. Okay, well, Cindy, I don't know about that right now today, but I can tell you that I will definitely think about that. And if you haven't attended, let's see, my Great Winter Meals class, I do a taco soup in there that is definitely a dump and go. And okay, and welcome, Tina. Interested in making soups, and you're from Montana. Okay, so let's look at the benefits of soup. You know, they've actually studied the benefits of soup, and soup eaters do have a higher diet quality score because, let's face it, soups have lots of vegetables in them and also lots of healthy liquids if we're especially starting with a homemade stock or broth. And believe it or not, they found that without soup, 40% of people are more likely to be overweight, because when you're consuming soup, well, you're getting fuller faster, you're filling yourself with low-calorie foods. And so it does increase the likelihood that larger portions of low-calorie food are going to be eaten by people who eat soup. And it doesn't even have to be every day of the week. Once a week makes a difference. It also lowers the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And that's because there's no sugar and there's not really, unless you do a high carb soup, there's not a lot of carbs in soup. There are a lot of vegetables, a lot of fiber, especially with those vegetables. And that helps tremendously with keeping our glycemic index, keeping things low on the glycemic index and not spiking our insulin response. And soup is notoriously a little bit higher in sodium, but it is offset by the amount of potassium that are in the vegetables that we have in our soups. So the nice thing is that potassium actually helps remove sodium from the body, so they balance each other a little bit. And you know, what could be more perfect with a food like soup than to have those nutrients balancing each other? And finally, it increases our water intake. And, you know, as we get older, we don't always get those triggers to remind us to drink. We don't always feel thirsty. And so we tend to get dehydrated pretty quickly. And so by eating soup, which contains a great deal of water, we can help prevent dehydration. So I'm just curious, are there other benefits that you'd like to share that you think of with soup?
It makes me feel fuller. I get full off a bowl of soup.
Yeah. So you don't feel like you necessarily have to eat anything else. You can just eat soup.
If it's full of vegetables, like you said, I usually go and get that the soup at the store, but like I said, it's too much sodium in it.
Yes, a lot of salt. Yeah, and if you can fill up on soup and not need anything else, my goodness, if you're looking to lose weight, soup can be a really good way to go. Yeah. Okay. So a few soup terms here. I'm going to play a little bit of a game here. I have some photos up here and you may recognize what these things are. I'm going to point to them and whoever can unmute themselves and say it the fastest wins. You're not winning anything, but hey, I'd love to know what you think this is.
Carrots, onions, and leeks, or
Carrots, onions, and celery. And do you know what do we call this?
Mirepoix.
Mirepoix. It's a French term for carrots, celery, and onions, which is the flavoring base that we use for making soups. And a mirepoix is the French version. We tend to apply it to anything. I'm going to ask you, you can keep yourself muted. That would be great. But there are also other versions of mirepoix that are Italian versions. The Italian version is called soffritto, and it is a combination of the same ingredients, except it may be that you use leeks instead of onions. So minor difference. And in German, it's called Suppengrün. And lots of times in Germany, I guess you can buy these ingredients in a packet. Is there anyone here that is familiar with German cooking and knows about making Suppengrün? No? Okay. And then another type of mirepoix is the Holy Trinity. And has anyone ever heard of the Holy Trinity when it comes to making Creole food? Creole food? So if we're making something like jambalaya or gumbo, what Creole cookers start with is onion, carrots, and green pepper. So that's where we're seeing some differences. And you can use lots of different things in your mirepoix, but this is where we're starting with a base. And the way that we make mirepoix is by dicing very finely and then sweating these vegetables in a little bit of oil. Now, I've had some folks say to me, well, what about, can we just do it in water? Can we save the calories and not use the oil? I want to just balance that. You certainly can, but I would balance it by saying that the amount of oil that you're using to do this is about maybe 2 tablespoons, and that goes across 8 servings of soup most likely. So the amount of oil that you're getting and the amount of calories from that oil is very minor per serving. And the oils also bring along, if you're using extra virgin olive oil or avocado oil, the benefits of omega-3 fatty acids. So it's not bad to have a little bit of oil with your mirepoix. Okay, so mirepoix. How about this second thing that we have here?
Herbs.
Herbs. And does anybody know the technical term of that this might be seen as in a recipe?
Bouquet garni.
Exactly, bouquet garni. And that can be just about anything, but this is fresh herbs, and they're tied in a bundle and placed in the broth of the soup that you're making, and then retrieved at the end of cooking to release those flavors while you're cooking vegetables and deepening the flavor of your broth. How about this? This is a little more obscure. We can see what these things are. We have well, ginger and shallots and garlic and peppercorns and some more herbs here. What would we call this in as a class of things? What would soup makers refer to this as?
Aromatics.
The aromatics, absolutely. So aromatics are added in along with this mirepoix along the way in many soup recipes. And again, they're added at the time when you're sweating things and you're releasing the oils from these very fragrant and flavorful herbs and spices. So aromatics are something that go into the base of a soup that you're making. And what about this little item up here? What is
Immersion blender.
It's an immersion blender, and this will make your life easier if you would like to make a blended soup. And some soups are blended in their entirety to be pureed and completely smooth. And sometimes recipes call for you to go in and put that immersion blender in and just blend a little bit of the soup so that you have a creamy rather than a brothy soup as an end result. So if you don't have an immersion blender, is all lost? Absolutely not. You can do the very same thing with your jar blender. So I finally broke down and bought an immersion blender, and I really like it a lot. And I have to say, sometimes though, it's easier for me to just use my regular large size blender. So there's benefits to both. Any questions or comments about some of those terms so far? All right, here's a few more. This is what confuses us so much, I think. What is the difference between a broth and a stock? Anybody want to take a stab at it?
Well, the stock is usually made out of the bones of the, let's say, chicken soup. I get stock, and the broth is maybe the culmination of all the vegetables and things put together, but no stock in it, bones and things.
Okay.
Same with the bone broth.
Okay. Anybody? Those are all good things. So you have meat in that stock, bones in the stock. Excuse me, bones in the stock, and you have vegetables in that broth. Anybody want to add anything?
The stock has more value to it as far as health-wise for me.
Okay. Can you say more about that?
Well, at this time with all this COVID virus, I've been making chicken stock and having like immunity soup, putting all kinds of garlic and ginger and different things in the soup. I put a lot of vegetables in it and different things and a lot of herbs.
I'm so glad you said that, because that is absolutely why I thought it was so important to start this class, this series, with a discussion about broths and stocks, because we often just think about the taste of broth or the stock that we're using in our soup, but we don't really think about all of the added benefits that come from that. And the more that we can put in there that can help build our immunity, the healthier, more nutritious this soup is going to be for us. Again, all the more reason to make our own. So thank you for that, Sheila. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
There. So let me clarify a little bit, add on to what Sheila just said there. So a broth is actually something that is made with either vegetables or meat, or a combination of both. So it's a little bit thinner, and it literally means, the word broths literally means to boil something. So it's made to be consumed on its own, actually. So maybe a consommé or a vegetable broth, you can actually sip those on their own. And so it might be one of those immunity broths, as Sheila was talking about, that you can make and just have instead of a cup of tea, for instance. Think about having all of those aromatics in there flavoring that. So we'll talk in a few moments about how to make that. And then stock itself is actually made, it's considered a building block for other soups. So it's more robust, and it's not just used for soups, but it could be used for sauces. It could be used for gravies, and it is made from bones. So those bones are often roasted for even deeper flavor, and the stock can be made with or without vegetables and herbs. You can make just a plain bone stock if you want. And a stock, unlike a broth, will begin to get viscous. Has anyone ever made boiled chicken bones and then put the liquid in the refrigerator, and the next day it's really gelatinous? It's not a fluid anymore. It's not liquid. It's jelly-like. That's what happens when we make stock, and that's the gelatin coming out of the bones. And that's really great for us because it's also that collagen that we're getting. So that's why bone broth is all the rage right now. Not only do we get collagen and glucosamine from bone broth, but we get lots of other benefits too when we make a bone broth. So let's talk a little bit about that. That's a bit of a hybrid between a stock and a broth, because a bone broth you might choose to cook even longer. With a stock, you can probably get that done in about 4 to 8 hours, but a good bone broth benefits from being cooked for up to 24 hours. And we'll see a little more about how that's done, but you're using a variety of different bones. The benefit is in the variety, because you're going to be extracting nutrients from the bone itself, from the connective tissue around the bone, and also from the marrow of the bone. So some bones that you get have more, like a femur bone, that's mostly bone, but then joint bones have more connective tissue. And some of those thicker bones, when they're cut through the middle, have a lot of marrow in them. So you want to try to get a combination of those things. And the bones themselves are very rich in calcium, magnesium, potassium, phosphorus, and also trace minerals that we often don't get enough of. And so those are the things that help strengthen our own bones. And the connective tissue, glucosamine and chondroitin, come from that, and that helps to build our cartilage. So if you're not doing something with collagen now and glucosamine, your bone broth can be a way to do that. And then the marrow itself actually provides vitamin A, vitamin K2, and some minerals like zinc, iron, boron, manganese, and selenium. And also omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. So you can see that this broth can become very, very nourishing. And it's often, these bones are roasted again for deeper flavor, oftentimes roasted with vegetables. So let's take a look a little more closely at vegetable broth. Has anyone ever made their own vegetable broth? Anyone? I'm going to check the chat here. I see Gail says, I love my Vitamix. It blends and heats. That's a beautiful idea for making soups. Yep, there's mirepoix. Okay. And Gail says Kroger sells pre-cut and pre-mixed mirepoix. Okay, there you go. All right, so vegetable stock you can make for pennies, literally pennies. And I can say that one way to start that is by saving all your scraps. If you're cutting an onion up for something else, or you're peeling carrots, or you're trimming celery, just start to throw those things into a plastic freezer bag and throw them into your freezer and accumulate them. And at some point, you're going to have enough to start your stock. And the guideline for that although I'm going to give you a recipe, the guideline is about half solids and half water. So that gives you something to start with, kind of a visual. And you want to cook it for at least an hour on the stove. If you want to have those vegetables relinquish their flavors, 3 to 4 hours is better. When I just made mine, I threw it in the crock pot and let it on for several hours during the day. 5 to 6 hours on high, low, 7 to 8 hours. And then at the end of all of that, you're going to strain that into a bowl so that you have a clear fluid. So this is the recipe for vegetable stock. This is the recipe I'm going to send to you. We start with a quartered onion. Notice you don't have to dice the onion. You don't have to do a lot of fine chopping, just rough cuts here. A couple of cloves of garlic, a couple of 3 carrots chopped, 3 stalks of celery, and then 3 cups of these veggie scraps that you've been keeping, and some sprigs of fresh thyme and parsley and rosemary. This is going to add a nice flavor. If you don't like any of those herbs, by all means, don't put them in. And some peppercorns, and then 8 to 10 cups of filtered water. So your end result here is going to yield somewhere around 8 cups. If you put 10 cups of water in there, some of the water may evaporate. So you might have between 8 and 10 cups. And these ideas for scraps apply. Onion skins and ends, garlic, leek ends, tomatoes that might be a little, not rotten, but a little further gone than you might like to use them in a salad, carrot peels and tops, wilted greens. So if you have some lettuce even, or cabbage, well, not cabbage, I wouldn't suggest cabbage, but wilted lettuces, maybe some arugula would be bitter. What other greens would we put in there? Wilted greens, any kind of lettuce. There's several kinds.
Spinach.
Spinach would be wonderful, thank you. And any kind of zucchini or summer squash peels would be good too. So what we would want to avoid is vegetables that'll make our broth bitter. So cruciferous vegetables, and I mean by that broccoli, cauliflower, cabbages, bok choy, Brussels sprouts, all of these are vegetables you wouldn't want to put into your vegetable stock because it may make it bitter tasting and conflict with anything else that we want to do. So we would also want to avoid using vegetables that are too starchy because it'll make your broth cloudy. So avoid putting potatoes in. You can put potatoes in when you're making your soup, but don't use it for your broth. And also avoid using corn. So sometimes people ask me, well, why do we care if our stock is cloudy? Well, I guess it doesn't, if it doesn't matter to you, it's okay. Sometimes soups just are visually more appealing when the stock is clarified and looks really, really clear. So you're adding all the ingredients into a stock pot, bringing it to a boil, and then simmering it and cooking it for at least an hour. It's as simple as that. It keeps in the refrigerator for a week, or you can freeze it in an airtight container for a long time, months, okay? And I would say that you can also freeze those in a jar, a mason jar if you have one. It would need to be a jar that's freezer proof, but don't fill it all the way to the top. You need to leave about an inch head space or the jar would break. Okay. Questions about vegetable broth? Okay, question here from Michelle, do you grind the peppercorns? No, you do not. So you just put them in there because you're going to strain all of this out of your broth at the end. You don't want those little black flecks of pepper. You just want a nice clear broth, just the whole peppercorns. What about using the Instant Pot? Absolutely, that would be terrific. They make great broths, and I don't have a recipe for that in particular, but at some point we may get around to talking about using Instant Pots, but yes, definitely. fact, I have a pressure cooker, which is essentially the same thing, and I intend to make my next veggie stock with the pressure cooker. And after it's cooked, do you throw out the veggies? Yep, because now by the time it's cooked all that time, it's extracted all the nutritional value from those vegetables. So yes, you probably want to just discard those. Okay. All right, so let's talk about chicken stock now. Chicken stock is made with the bones of the chicken. So how many of you made that from the bones of a rotisserie chicken that you've gotten at the grocery store? Does anybody do that? Yep, I see some hands going up. Yep. I feel like that's such a great value. You get a whole meal from that chicken, and then you throw those bones into a stock pot, and you get a nice flavorful broth at the end, or a stock at the end of all of that. And lots of times those rotisserie chickens are seasoned, and so you get that extra seasoning in there as well. But one of the things to be aware of with that is that you're also getting the salt. So one of the advantages of making your own stock is that you can keep the sodium down in your soups by keeping the sodium down in your stock. And we've talked about a lot of this. It's made with the bones. It becomes gelatinous, and that is the collagen. It can be made with the vegetables, herbs and spices, or without. And then the end product is very intense. And so you have the option when you're using it to make soup to use all stock, or also to dilute that stock with other ingredients. So you might use water. You could use some juice, like many times tomato juice would be good in a soup. Wine, a little bit of wine, not a lot of wine. Milk, so you've seen milky soups, or other liquids that you might use could also include bean liquid, the cooking liquid that you use to cook your beans in if you're cooking from raw. So those are some things that you can use without losing flavor, because the chicken stock is very flavorful itself. And we'll talk more about the bean liquid when we talk about bean soups in another class. And this is the recipe for chicken stock. And again, you'll laugh here. So the bones from 1 to 2 chicken carcasses, and then using filtered water is always preferable if you can do that. That just assures a more pure taste. If you have any kind of chlorine or fluorination issues, any kind of taste to your water, that just would throw your stock taste off. So use filtered water if you can. And then the optional ingredients are these coarsely chopped vegetables, parsley, some peppercorns, maybe a little splash of wine, little apple cider vinegar. So we throw a little bit of apple cider vinegar in there because it draws the nutrients out of the bones. And you'll see that when we get into the beef bone broth as well. And then, I don't know how many of you would use chicken feet. Anybody here ever use chicken feet? I'm going to look at the whole class here, see if anybody's raising their hands, because this is definitely can be a cultural thing. I know that at the market, one of the farmers markets that I go to, there's a Hispanic meat counter, and they regularly sell chicken feet. No part of the animal is wasted, and chicken feet are very nutritious in that they have lots of collagen in them. So just if you're going to use chicken feet, make sure they're cleaned. None of us wants to be cleaning chicken feet. So those are all fine things to use. Chicken heads would be another kind of difficult thing for most of us. So put the bones in a large pot or a crock pot, and then cover it with the filtered water. And then you can add those optional ingredients, and you can put it into a crock pot as well, or into your Instant Pot, in which case it would go very quickly. If you use a crock pot, turn it to low. Now I want to just make this point about making a chicken stock, and especially a turkey stock if you're making with turkey bones. I made this mistake one year because I put my turkey carcass in water, and I turned it up and walked away, and it started to boil. And, I thought, oh, well, boil it. What's wrong with that? You're getting all the good stuff out. But boiling, for some reason, does make a stock cloudy, especially a turkey stock. So you want to keep it on low or let it simmer for 8 to 24 hours, as opposed to a rolling boil, which isn't going to be a problem with your vegetable broth that we talked about earlier. And at the end of the time, you can add parsley if you like. Parsley is one of those things that is beneficial when added at the end of a cooking cycle. And again, you're going to strain this broth, and you can store it in the refrigerator for up to a week, or you can freeze it. Now, what I like to do is cool mine enough that I can put it into jars. I put mine in mason jars, whatever I'm not going to freeze. And I might put it into smaller jars, that depending on what I'm making. And what will happen is the fat will rise to the top of that. And honestly, that broth or that stock lasts longer in the refrigerator for me if I let that fat on there undisturbed until I'm ready to use it, because it acts as a seal on the broth and keeps things fresh in there. So that's just a little tip about what to do with your chicken stock. Thoughts about chicken stock? I see there's some comments here. Oh yes, the apple cider vinegar. Thanks, new info. Yeah, Gail, that's something we'll also talk about with the beef bone broth too. Chicken feet, heads and necks are never really seen in the grocery store where the chicken is sold. I can remember that being a very a part of what the grocery store typically sold a long time ago. Not the head, but you used to just get a whole chicken just cut up. That was it. And you got all the other pieces, parts that went along with it. But we've become a little sanitized over the years, and all those other parts that we could have easily used, like the backs and things for stock, are not as easy to find anymore. So we're better off. Like what I do now is buy a whole chicken and I disassemble it myself and then use those parts for stock. Okay. Check our time here, 2:41. All right, so let's look at beef bone broth then. How many of you are consuming beef bone broth for health purposes right now? I had somebody who said in the last class that they're doing that. Loretta, tell us about that.
I use it in my in some of my foods. Instead of using liquid, I use that like grits and whatever. But I'm told, and I don't know how true it is, but I'm doing it. I told it has a lot of collagen in it to help, firm you up, and because as we get older, we get really loose, and it helps with it's got a lot of collagen in it. It's supposed to be anyway.
Yeah, it definitely does. That's what makes it jelly-like. When it sets up and it's thick like that, that's the gelatin, that's the collagen. Who else said that they're doing this? Gail, did you say that you're drinking it for health purposes?
I do, yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and it looks like 2 to 4 cups a day when you're taking it as kind of a tonic is a good way to go. But we can also use it to make our soups really rich and healthy as well. And it's a little bit like the chicken stock. We're using bones and we're using vegetables as we want. And I talked to you about the types of bones. So here we see the differences. There's some that have meat on, some that have more marrow in them, and there's some that have more connective tissue associated with them. I don't see, they're knuckle bones and things. I don't see any of those on here, but knuckle bones or shin bones of animals would be particularly good for connective tissue. And you can see how gelatinous this gets and how rich and brown this gets when you have roasted the vegetables and roasted the bones. So let's take a look at this recipe. This is using 10 pounds of bones. This isn't easy to do anymore either, but you need to find a butcher who will give you bones or who will sell you bones. Used to be able to just get them, buy them, but or get them for free, but now you need to buy them. And I do recommend with beef that you get organic grass-fed if you can, because they're going to be much, much better for you, much purer. So mix of marrow bones, femur bones, and bones with, bones with meat on them. So an oxtail is actually a really great source of collagen and also a little bit of flavoring from that meat that's on the tail. Short ribs, knuckle and joint bones are all good. And then carrots, onions, garlic. Again, you're not dicing and slicing these all up. You're just making rough cuts. And here the garlic, you just take that whole head of garlic and cut it in half. You don't have to peel your onions. You don't have to peel your garlic. Just cut them in half and chop your carrots and your celery into 2-inch pieces. A few bay leaves. The bay leaves would go in the broth. You wouldn't roast the bay leaves. Same thing with the peppercorns. And in this case, 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. Now the instructions are a little different with beef broth because those beef bones tend to have a lot of impurities in them that create a lot of foam that comes to the top of your stock. So it's just, you don't have to blanch them, but if you blanch them, you're going to start off with a nicer looking product to begin with and less skimming. So you blanch the bones. What that means is that you cover them with cold water, bring them to a boil and just simmer them for about 15 minutes or so, and then drain them and rinse them. And for this number of bones, you may need 2 pots. So then roast the bones, roast the vegetables at 450 degrees, and maybe do that for about 30 minutes, toss them around, let them roast for another 15 or 30 minutes more. And then scrape up all the brown bits and all the vegetables and all the bones and put them into your stock pots. Again, you might need 2. I have a very large stock pot, but you might need a couple of stock pots, or you might need to do it in 2 batches, which is okay. You can put them in the refrigerator for next day. So this is 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar in 12 cups of water. So for those 10 pounds of bones, you're using 12 cups of water. And up to 24 hours is a great amount of time to be able to have an end product that's going to assure that you've pulled all the worthwhile nutrients out of the bones. And then you can strain it. In this case, you can add ice cubes if you want to hasten the cooling process. It's okay to add a little more water in there. And once again, you'll get that fat at the top, and you can either discard that and box these up and put them in the freezer, or you can leave that fat on until you use it in the refrigerator. Up to 5 days. With the fat on top, it's going to stay longer for you. So questions about beef bone broth? I see that Gail says if you frequent a store or a meat market, have them save them for you. You do that for dog bones. Yeah, great idea. Yeah, if you have a butcher that will do that for you, that would be the best. Okay, so to wrap up the class here, let's look at a couple of soups. We're going to start with the soup making steps, some basic steps. And we begin with sweating those aromatics we talked about in the very beginning, that mirepoix in a little bit of fat. And you can use the fat that comes from the olive oil that you put in there, or if you are making a soup that has bacon in it, you start by cooking your bacon, taking your bacon out of the pan, and then using the bacon to sweat your mirepoix. Don't throw away that good fat. Go ahead and use that to sweat your aromatics. So you can see what we're doing over here. we're getting it sauteed, sweated. Now, a word of caution here, you want to just sweat these vegetables. You do not want to brown and caramelize them. That's not the intention. So don't crank the heat up really high.
I recently read that I should put my EVOO in the pan and then add the vegetables while the oil is cold and then heat it up. So I never heard that before. Can you comment?
I think that would be okay. I think that the benefit is that you're not throwing them into oil that's too hot. I always like to warm mine a little bit but I don't think it matters for this. If I was making something that I wanted to get crispy or browned or something, I might do it a little differently. Or if I didn't want the oil will tend to soak into those things then when it's cool like that. So I don't know that it matters a whole lot in doing your mirepoix. When your mirepoix is pretty well softened, you can add your fragrant herbs or spices. And in this case, you're probably talking about your dried herbs. Dried herbs are very, very intense compared to fresh herbs. It takes, the exchange on that is 1 tablespoon of fresh herb to a teaspoon of a dry herb. So when you put your dry herbs in the mirepoix, it releases those fragrances and those oils. Same thing with your garlic. You can put all of that in at that time after your mirepoix has been softened a bit. And then you can add your next vegetables. So if you're adding potatoes or squash, things that need to be cooked in the broth, you can add them into your pot and saute them around a little bit. There's no exact science here. It's all going to be terrific. And then add your broth. And any vegetable juices that you might have, any water. I'm going to take milk off. That's a mistake. I didn't mean to put milk on there. So don't put milk in at this point. You want to stir milk in later. And then if there's anything to skim that comes to the top, you want to skim as you're simmering if there's anything that you don't want there. So you're simmering until those vegetables are soft. So the hardest vegetable that you've put in there, when that's pretty well softened, then you're ready to add the next thing, which would be cooked meats, pasta, cooked pasta, generally speaking. There are some exceptions, but if you cook your pasta in another pot and drain it, then put it into your soup. Again, you will avoid that cloudiness that can come from the starches in pasta that you cook right in the soup. Same thing with grains. And then here's where we put herbs that are maybe fresh herbs, like the parsley we talked about, but we could also put cilantro. There's going to be recipes that call for cilantro. Those fresh herbs usually go in at the end. Any spices that you want to add to brighten the end product. This is where your cooking, your taste buds come in. You know, you get your spoon in there and you start tasting and you start saying, well, what does this need? And you tweak it here. This is also where we put greens at the end. So if we're adding spinach or we're adding kale, we want to do it at the very end of a soup because then those greens stay nice and vibrant and green for serving. So if you are making a soup that calls for greens, but you don't plan to eat it until the next day, I would say make it up to this step number 5. Or even through here, but leave the greens out until you reheat the soup. I see Linda's giving a thumbs up on that. You agree with that? That keeps your soup looking beautiful and green and your greens from being too slimy by the time they're reheated.
What I always do is put a squirt of fresh lemon in at the end of the soup.
Yeah,
and I didn't see that on the list.
No, that's great. I love that idea. Yep. We often add an acid at the end of a soup to just kind of brighten it. Do you find that helps with the color of the greens, or is it a flavoring thing for you?
It's more of flavor because it's not that much lemon.
Yeah, it's just enough. Sometimes we stir a little bit of, it could be a little wine, it could be a little vinegar. It depends on the soup. So I'm glad you brought that up. That's something I think I'll go back and add that to the slide. It's not in all soup recipes, but in a lot of them. Okay, so here's a couple of recipes that I'm going to send your way. This one is a soup recipe that does use beef. It uses meat. And then this is a version of a vegetable soup that doesn't use meat. So when we look at the steps that we've talked about, here are the ingredients for the beef vegetable soup. I know it's a little bit hard to see. I don't want to bore you with the details, but here's our mirepoix in here and our aromatic garlic. And there's our homemade broth. We can use beef or chicken in this recipe. And then we're using diced tomatoes and basil, oregano, and thyme. In this case, these are added later. They're not added with the mirepoix. I think you could, and then you could add more. There's something to be said for adding herbs along the way, and again, so that they stand out and don't get too muddied with everything else and lose their flavor. So you can keep tasting, keep trying. And then this soup has potatoes and green beans and corn and peas. And at the end, we stir in fresh parsley. So we're going to dab that meat with paper towel and season it, and then put it in the pot to brown for about 4 minutes, and turning it, and then 4 minutes more. And then taking all of that out and adding the oil into the pot to add the mirepoix. And after that, the mirepoix and the aromatics are sauteed. We're adding broth and tomatoes, and we put the beef back in at this point, because beef in this case is probably going to require more cook time. It's a stew beef. It's those beef pieces that take longer to cook. If you were using hamburger instead, which you could easily do, you'd cook it you'd cook it and put it aside, but then stir it in at the very end, because it's already been softened. It's already finished. And you will add your ingredients that take the least amount of time at the very end. So in this case, corn and peas can go in at the very end, and then stir in your parsley. Now, having said that, you'll look at a crock pot recipe and see that you're dumping all of those things in together. So it's very forgiving that way. Soups change depending on the way that you make them. A soup's going to taste different if you have it in a crock pot all day versus if you make it on the stovetop. Just subtle differences will happen there. Thoughts or comments about that recipe? How many of you make your own vegetable beef soup now? It's a fairly common soup recipe. Anyone?
I do sometimes, yeah.
I will definitely be making a minestrone soup.
Okay.
I'm not a big, I love progressive minestrone, and it's like I say, I eat too much of it, so it's too much sodium. But I would definitely be making that.
Okay, well, this minestrone is also very forgiving. I won't go through all the details of the recipe, but it's very much the same as what we just talked about, in that you sweat the aromatics and the mirepoix, and then you add those vegetables. You can make this completely vegetarian by using vegetable broth, or you can use chicken broth. And then you can use kidney beans, but if you prefer to use another kind of bean or a chickpea, you can use that in there. It's very forgiving, very open to interpretation. And at the end, you can add some already cooked small pastas, like little elbow pastas, or ditallinis would be nice in there. And now you have a very complete and flavorful meal, and you've got the protein from the beans to substitute for any meat that you're not using. Yeah, go ahead, Loretta.
So I have a crock pot I never use. So you said I can put Just put it all in there at one time and just let it slow cook?
You can, except for the pasta. I would cook the pasta separately, stir that in at the end, and add the parsley.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this session. My gosh, no wonder I had too much to talk about last time. I had a lot more recipes. So we did talk about soup benefits and some terms surrounding soups. And we talked about making homemade stock and broth. Anybody think they're going to give that a try? Making your own stock broth? Yeah? Awesome. I would love to hear about it. And I would love to have you work on that for the next couple of weeks until my next class comes out on the soups from scratch, where we will talk about some other recipe inspirations, and you'll actually get to use your broth or your stock. So make it, freeze it, and come back for more, okay? So let me take a quick look here. It looks like there's quite a bit in the chat. Okay, awesome. I see lots of that I was on target with a lot of things, and that's good to know. Thank you so much for coming. Don't forget to look for that email because it'll have those recipes. I'm going to be doing a healthy desserts class at 4 o'clock, and tomorrow heart healthy cooking. And I have a few other related classes too, and I'd love to have you come back to class. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great class, as always.
Have a great day, everyone. Happy
You too, Debbie. Thank you.